Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is a child and adult psychiatrist. Dr. Christine Crawford is also Associate Medical Director for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, the largest grassroots mental health organization in the United States. She's also Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at the Boston University School of Medicine and a mother of two. Dr. Crawford joins us today from Boston. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are not alone. It's a very appropriately named book and certainly a series because so many families, so many youth, teens, tweens, young people are experiencing mental health issues. Take us through what concerns you most about what you're seeing in your practice when we talk about the epidemic of youth mental health.
I think what concerns me the most when it comes to youth mental health is that our kids are really struggling, and they're also struggling gaining access to the supports that they need, and that there are significant delays in kids being able to get access to treatment such as medications or therapy, and to know that there's such a shortage of youth mental health providers. And all of that is contributing to the fact that there are a lot of kids out in the community who are really struggling with how to cope, and they're lacking the tools to be able to navigate these challenging times that unfortunately our kids are growing up in. So I really worry about that because kids are developing really severe symptoms of distress, whether it's being very sad and depressed and then having thoughts about not wanting to be alive, or being exposed to trauma and being struggling with ongoing thoughts related to that trauma without the intensive help and supports that they need. So I worry about kids presenting to the emergency room in a state of crisis rather than getting the more immediate supports that they need in the community so that they don't have to present in a state of crisis and that making the first time that they engage in mental health care.
There is undoubtedly an ocean of information, resources, tools on this topic out there. What makes your book, You're Not Alone for Parents and Caregivers, different and stand out from the rest of the resources available?
With this book, I wanted to create a one-stop shop for caregivers. Just one book, one resource that they could reach out to, no matter which stage they are on in terms of their kids' mental health journey. So this book is relevant if you are just starting to develop concerns about your child's mental health, or you don't even have concerns about your child's mental health, but you want to know what to look out for. And then also for people who have experienced a number of different ups and downs on their journey, and maybe their kid has more significant challenges. So it's one book, one guide that parents can use and caregivers can use that can follow them over the course of the child's development. Because this book really expands youth mental health starting as young as 3 years old and going up into the high school years and the young adult years, right? So to be able to have one book where over time you can open up the book and say, all right, this is how things looked when my child was in elementary school, but now we're in high school and things look different. You can still use the same book. The other thing about this book is that it doesn't focus simply on the diagnosis. It doesn't focus on what is wrong with my kid. And it's not a book to reach out to so you can diagnose your kid and feel as though you have the capabilities of a mental health professional and to know exactly what is going on. There are a lot of books like that that currently exist that focus on specific diagnosis, but the focus of this book is better understanding your child and their emotional states and their behavioral states. And I do have a section where I have different groupings of how behaviors and moods can present. But it's really focusing on understanding your child, understanding how you can connect and communicate with your child who may be experiencing different emotional and behavioral states. And I think that connection part, how to communicate with your patient, your child, that is the most important part in this book and differentiates it from the rest.
Dr. Crawford, it might surprise many parents, caregivers, and others listening to or watching this interview to hear you say, as young as 3 years old, when you talk about the different ages and stages of knowing, how to handle potential mental illness issues with your child. Talk to us about what's happening and why we should be aware of this, let's say at the age of 3, our child being 3 years old.
Yeah, you're right. It oftentimes surprises parents when we talk about youth mental health. For some reason, they think that mental health challenges really become more of an issue when the kid maybe is in middle school or in high school. But really, we see the manifestations of mental health problems very early on in life. And it's because kids have emotions and they develop and understand those emotions over time. And they're lacking the tools and strategies for how to effectively manage those emotions. They're going through all of this for the first time. And so for some young kids, they may experience emotional changes at more intense levels compared to other people, but they're lacking the strategies and tools for how to manage that, right? And so having conversations with your kids about their emotional state is really helpful because that gives them the tools that they can use to communicate their distress to other people. So, for example, as young as 3 years old, kids are starting to learn about emotions. They're learning how to recognize different emotional states in other people. And they're also learning about what different emotional states look like for themselves, what sort of thoughts they have, how do they feel in their body, and then seeing that reflected in the people in their lives and allowing them to kind of understand what all of these things mean. And so empowering your kids with the language to talk about their emotions is so helpful. And you can start that at age 3 because that's when they're really picking up on different emotional states. Building off of that too, kids are constantly noticing us. They're constantly watching and noticing all the adults in their lives. And so it's important starting as young as 3 or even younger to model how it is that you talk about your mood state and how it is you talk about what tools you use to kind of navigate different emotional challenges. So, for example, if there is a child who appears to be very angry and they're irritable and they're acting out, and maybe they're 4 years old, you can say things to them. Oh, well, I'm noticing that you're yelling a lot more, that you are tensing up your shoulders, and that you're scrunching up your face. It looks like you're really angry. You know, when I get angry, what's really helpful for me is to go outside and go for a run. What are your thoughts about us just going for a walk? Maybe that will make you feel and look less angry. You can have that conversation starting as young as 3 and 4, and that could be really helpful and important modeling.
I think it's such an important point that you've just made because depending on, certain cultures, how you were raised, parents, especially of young children, tend to want to tell their kids how they're feeling or predict how they're feeling as opposed to asking them how they're feeling, which, as I'm hearing you describe it, down the line, as you go through different ages and stages with that child, can turn into a bigger issue. So, what would you say to a parent then in terms of managing that, listening as opposed to speaking first?
I know it's so hard because as parents, we're so accustomed to entering into problem solving mode. And we're so used to just doing things for our kids. A great example of this, and I'm kind of in the middle of this with my 3 and 4-year-old. I'm always in a rush trying to get out of the house. And so I'm dressing them, I'm the one putting on their shoes. When really I should take a step back, have some patience, and allow my children to kind of do that on their own. But the reality is, for a lot of caregivers, we're just trying to get through the day really quickly. And so if we see a problem, we call it out as a problem, we'll label it as a problem, and then we want to problem solve. But we really need to take the time to kind of allow our children to engage and participate in this experience of understanding themselves, understanding why there may be some changes in their mood state, to understand why there may be some changes in how they're behaving, and to take the time to lean into those conversations. They may not go as quickly as you like, but you might actually be surprised by what it is that your child shares with you. So framing some of these conversations, such as coming from a place of curiosity, and to say, I've noticed these things and I'm really curious about what might be behind some of these things. What do you think? Why do you think it is that you are more worried about going to school? Or I wonder why it is that you no longer want to go to gymnastics practice when you used to love going. What are your thoughts about why it's different now? And you might learn more about what it is that your kid experiences in their daily life. There might be bullying or other forms of trauma, but it's important to have that curiosity, to have those conversations so you can learn what is really going on with your kid rather than assuming what is going on with your kid.
You talked about what you believe sets You Are Not Alone apart from the other resources that are available. I'm curious as to the approach that you chose for this book. Could you take us through that strategy? Who did you interview and what did you learn?
So it was really important for me to connect with people with lived experience because they have gone through this mental health journey themselves when they were a kid growing up, currently as a kid, as well as caregivers and teachers. They just learned so much along the way as they were going through this journey that I wanted to make sure to capture those experiences and to put them in the book because a lot of people feel like they are the only families who are going through these things. But to read the stories of other people who have lived through this, you feel less alone. Right. And that was really the premise of this book is to kind of validate the experiences of folks who are navigating the mental health system, which can be very overwhelming, as well as the distress that comes along with having a kid who is struggling emotionally. And there are a lot of lessons learned from people who have gone through this. So I wanted to make sure to have a resource available to share all those experiences with people. So what I did was I interviewed over 80 people, a combination of teachers, caregivers, coaches, parents, as well as young adults and kids, actual kids who have experienced mental health challenges or adults who have been supporting the mental health of their kids. I conducted interviews over Zoom for about an hour, and I learned so much from those conversations. What I learned was that people were obviously concerned about what was going on, but they weren't all that focused on what exactly is wrong with my kid or what exactly is wrong with me. But it was more about understanding how do I continue to live and to function and to interact with people, connect with my family, given all of these challenges that I'm experiencing with my mental health. What do I do outside of my appointments with my mental health providers, where you are spending the majority of your time, in school and other places? So I learned about the importance of providing tools and strategies for how to navigate all the other aspects of an individual's life who is living with a mental health challenge. And then I also interviewed mental health experts who cover, different backgrounds in terms of psychologists and pediatricians, just to show that, yes, we do have clinical experts, but also people with lived experience are experts too. So it was nice piling all of that information together and putting it all into this book.
Let's talk a little bit about the science as it relates to youth mental health challenges. Are there any aspects of the latest findings in this space that you think parents in general really need to know about?
What's important for parents to know is that mental health symptoms can appear early on in life, not just when they're a teenager, but early on in life. And very significant mental health symptoms we're noticing can appear in very young kids. There's been some unfortunate data that has emerged over recent years that kids as young as 5 can develop thoughts around suicide. And for many years, it was hard to even imagine that a kid as young as 5 would contemplate suicide or even attempt suicide. But we have found that kids of color, especially our Black kids, between the ages of 5 to 12, are 2 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts and behavior compared to white children. And so that is very alarming to know that suicidal behaviors can start at such a young age. And we have someone in the book who has an experience in which they attempted suicide at the age of 5. And so it's important for parents to know that severe, serious symptoms can emerge early. That's why being able to recognize and detect some of these red flag symptoms is so helpful, and to get kids connected into care is incredibly important, and to not delay at all.
Recognizing symptoms is a tall order for any of us, certainly those of us who are not medical professionals. So, what can you say to a parent or a caregiver on that front in terms of what should they be looking for as a potential symptom of mental health issues?
It's really hard, especially as kids grow up and they enter into the teenage years. A lot of caregivers make assumptions about some of the behaviors that they see, and you might label it as typical teenage behavior when it actually may be a sign of something else that is going on. And so I know that the majority of caregivers and parents, they're not mental health professionals. They're not professionals at all. But what they do know is they know their kid, and they are experts in their child because they've seen their child grow up over many, many years. And so over that period of time, they've been able to determine a pattern in which the kid behaves and how they respond emotionally to certain things. So as a caregiver, if you notice a change in the pattern of behavior of your kid, that should be a red flag. If you notice that your kid who used to come home and tell you about what was going on in the day, that over the last several months, they've just gone straight to their room and they're not even talking to you, and they're not talking to any of their friends. You've noticed that your kid who used to be a straight A student, the last 2 months, they're now just earning all Fs and they're failing their classes and they're not showing up. Or you notice that your kid used to have good sleep patterns and good sleep habits, and now they're up, all night, and this has been going on. You are well equipped to notice those changes in their behavior. And all of those things are impacting how the kid is functioning day to day. So if you see this change in their behavior in this pattern, then you should be curious about what's going on. And that's a red flag that maybe some additional supports should be put in place.
So, as a parent, you have recognized and identified a pattern of behavior that concerns you. What then would you say to that parent should be the next optimal step that they take?
What's interesting is that oftentimes the next step is that we as caregivers enter into solution mode, problem solving mode. And we may do a quick Google search about where is the best therapist in my area. Or we might type in a set of symptoms and see what the internet says is going on. Or we might just reach out to another clinician or expert to get an understanding as to what's happening. But what we really should do is rather than going straight to problem solving mode, we should take a step back and have a conversation with our kid. We often forget to do that basic thing because we want to get our kid connected to help as quickly as possible, right? But it actually is worth the time and the investment of time in having these conversations with your kid first, because that can better guide you on your approach for reaching out to the appropriate types of supports. So, an example could be if you notice a change in your kid's behavior and you're worried about how they are functioning, start the conversation by being curious. So, I've noticed that you haven't been going to school, you've been sleeping in a lot, you've been moving really slow, and you're not eating as much, like you're just staying in your room, you're not coming down for dinner. What do you think is behind that? And they might reveal to you that there are some particular stressors that they might be experiencing. And it might be just a matter of problem solving on what to do about that stressor, that thing that's in their life that's causing this change. Or if there isn't anything that pops up like that, that's easily identifiable, that's kind of contributing to these symptoms, you could say, well, what do you think is going on? And what do you think would be most helpful for you? Have you thought about things that can be different to make you feel a little bit better? And they may say things like, I really do think it would be helpful if I um, decided to drop this this AP course or this honors level course in biology. Maybe I should just drop that. And you could say, sounds like an appropriate problem, right? A solution. You wouldn't have known that if you didn't have that conversation. So talk to your kid first, get a sense as to what they think is going on, and to hear their thoughts about a possible solution and possible forms of intervention.
At what point then would a parent or a caregiver look at professional help? What would you say needs to happen or needs to be shown before that solution is then becomes the next step?
Mhm. So, a really important thing is if there are any immediate safety concerns that you're noticing, if your child is making comments such as, I feel like I'm a burden to other people, I feel like everyone would be better off without me, or I think I would be better off dead. To thank the child for sharing that with you, but to let them know that you are going to have to reach out for immediate supports because you wouldn't want those thoughts to get bigger, to take up a lot of space in their head, and you wouldn't want them to act on those thoughts. And so reaching out to your primary care doctor is actually reasonable as a way to have some direction as to appropriate next steps. But also, if you are immediately concerned about what it is you're hearing from your child and they're talking about harming themselves or harming other people, certainly, reach out for emergency support. And in the United States, we have something available called 988, which is a three-digit number that's available for everyone across the United States if they are experiencing a mental health concern or a loved one is experiencing a mental health concern. So any immediate safety concerns, certainly reach out to support immediately.
There are many experts who believe that it's a question not of if, but when. And by that, I mean that all parents need to have some basic understanding of how to deal with mental health issues in their kids, whether those children present mental health issues or not, because that's the world we live in. I'm curious as to your thoughts on if that proactive approach is where we're at.
Yeah, the proactive approach is certainly important because we're talking about safety, and a lot of people forget that mental health conditions can actually be life-threatening conditions if they go untreated. In the same way that we invest a lot of time into having conversations around safety when you're in the car driving and you're wearing your seatbelt or staying away from drugs or other things, we should have the same type of conversation as it relates to mental health symptoms, because having that awareness can actually save lives. And so if you talk to your kid about what depression looks like, what are some of the things they should be looking out for, to talk to them early about that, because if they start to notice some subtle changes in themselves, they would be more likely to reach out to you and have a conversation about what their experiences have been. And then that allows both of you to be able to reach out to the appropriate support, so that their symptoms don't get worse and that they don't further interfere with their life. And so we have to teach our kids how to not only take care of their physical well-being, how to stay safe, but how to stay emotionally safe too is very important. We make this assumption that kids can just learn how to navigate and manage really intense emotions, or how to cope with challenging situations. We just figure they'll figure it out. They'll pick up things along the way. No, we have to be very intentional about talking about mental health, about modeling how to take care of your mental health so that they can develop those tools, put them away in their toolbox. So if something were to bubble up to the surface, they can quickly intervene instead of letting things drag out to a point in which they evolve into a crisis.
Dr. Crawford, you mentioned you're the parent of a 3 and a 4-year-old, and I wonder how writing You're Not Alone for Parents and Caregivers, the research that you undertook, the things that you see and hear in your clinical practice, how has that impacted, if at all, the way that you parent your young children?
It was really interesting talking to kids and some young adults about their mental health journeys and what it is that they hope that the adults in their lives did for them when they were struggling the most. And most of them wanted an adult to reach out to them and just connect with them, to just hear them out, to listen to what it is that they're going through, and to just support them rather than providing reassurance, rather than minimizing their symptoms and their experiences, rather than immediately going into problem solving. They just wanted someone to be there to connect with them and to listen. And so I have found that in my short time, just 4 years now, being a parent, I was really focused on making sure I was doing everything right, getting them the right toys, putting them in the right activities, all of those right things. But I've realized that what is most important is just connecting with my kids and being a good enough mom. And being good enough means just being there for them, listening to them, talking to them, and being present. And it's so hard to do that because we have so many different things going on. But I really have made it a point to prioritize connection rather than prioritizing getting everything right. And it was so helpful to hear from the people that I spoke to about how important it was for them to just have one adult who was in their corner, who understood them, and how that made a world of a difference when it came to their mental health journey.
Obviously, a heavy topic in many families. There's lots of kids struggling. There are plenty of parents and caregivers searching for answers when we talk about youth mental health struggles. Dr. Crawford, what gives you hope on this topic?
What gives me hope is that we are still having conversations about youth mental health. It is so encouraging because during the pandemic, there certainly was an increase around the amount of attention that was being paid towards youth mental health. And I really appreciated that. While at the same time, I much more appreciate the fact that we are still having these conversations and that they didn't end when things changed with the pandemic. I'm hopeful and I remain hopeful because a lot of kids feel comfortable and empowered with the fact that they should prioritize their mental health and they know how to advocate for their mental health needs. So they feel comfortable talking to their parents about the importance of taking a mental health day, communicating that to their teachers when things are challenging, when things are kind of getting in the way, and to feel comfortable doing that. And also for kids themselves having conversations with each other. They're looking out for each other. They're noticing things in their friends and they're talking about it. So I love the fact that we now have normalized conversations about mental health and normalized conversations about mental health challenges in young kids. And to know that treatment options are available and to not shy away from them. So I've noticed that there also is some changes as it relates to engaging in therapy, which is incredibly encouraging.
So much important food for thought. Dr. Christine Crawford, child and adult psychiatrist, author of You Are Not Alone for Parents and Caregivers. We so appreciate your time and your insight today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.